is the primary in Pennsylvania. And Dave McCormick is the Republican who is running, the only Republican who's running for U.S. Senate. Mr. McCormick, how are you, sir?
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Doing great. The people of Pennsylvania know you well. You ran in 2022 for the U.S. Senate, and you lost to Dr. Oz in the primary by 951 votes. What the heck?
Yeah, that's a tough way to go down. It's a tough way to go down.
Man.
But
why didn't you make like a thing about that? Like, why didn't you fight that? And
there was a recount.
And
I looked carefully at the recount, and I didn't. It looked to me like I had lost fair and square, and it would have been probably months more of prolonging the fight, and so I thought it was best for both fair and best to move forward. And so that's why I did it. It was tough to lose, as you might imagine. But the good thing about it was kind of a gut check, because once you've gone through that, then you consider doing it again, you really know what you've been through, and you say, hey, do I really want to do this? And I've concluded I really do want to do this. And the reason is because I think the country's in deep trouble, economically, militarily, spiritually. I think this Senate seat could not be more important. Not only to make sure Pennsylvania has the right leadership, but to win the majority, and also to help up and down the ticket, help President Trump win in Pennsylvania, but help other leaders across Pennsylvania win on the ticket. And so that's why I'm doing it. But, unfortunately or fortunately, you learn more from your failures than your successes. So I certainly learned a lot, and I think I'm a better candidate because of it.
Yeah, if we had more time, and hopefully we could talk again, I'd love to ask, just reflect more on like how Dr. Oz, like how that whole thing happened and how he won. Like that's just a bizarre moment in our history. But I'd rather move forward. You listed a couple of the problems with our country right now, and we share all the same concerns. But you mentioned spiritual.
Yeah.
What do you mean by the spiritual concerns of our country?
Well, it's a good day to ask that question, because when you see these kids marching on campus, they don't know the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. Only about a third of our young people are patriotic, believe in the exceptionalism of America. And you say, my God, how could that happen? How could you have Jewish kids on the campus of University of Pennsylvania who stay in their rooms because they're afraid of violence if they walk across campus? And then you see those 3 college presidents testify. And you say, that's how it happened. It's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of moral clarity. And that's the decline. That's the spiritual decline that I'm speaking of. It's religious in part, but it's not just religious. It's a set of values about what's made America special, a set of values about what's right and what's wrong. And I think we've lost that. And I think it's due in part to the weakness of our leaders. And my opponent, Bob Casey, is a good example of that. He's very, very weak. When we see this, he's endorsed Summer Lee, who's a good example of the kind of anti-Semitic behavior that we see. She's a congresswoman who represents my district in Pittsburgh. Bob Casey's endorsed her. When you see those kinds of decisions for purely political reasons, you say that's how we have this decline, because we don't have leaders that are stepping up and showing the difference between right and wrong. And that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah. Let's talk about Casey for a minute here. So he's the current senator. The Casey name goes way back in Pennsylvania. All right, correct me if I'm wrong. I used to live in Doylestown, but I was just a kid. But the former governor, his dad was the governor, right?
Yeah.
But his dad was anti-abortion and pro-gun.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Pennsylvania, which is a state, and we talk a lot about the city and country divide, and you got 2 big cities there. But it is its country. Like Pennsylvania is like as red as any red like place in Texas. Rick Santorum used to be the senator.
Yeah.
For the love of Rick Santorum was the senator. So talk to me about Casey and the Casey name and how you overcome a name. You had to overcome Dr. Oz, and now you got to overcome the Casey name as well. And tell me about the state that is Pennsylvania and how red it is.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the Casey name, listen, this is a guy who's lived off his father's name. He's been in public office 30 years, 12 years as a statewide official, and then 18 years in the Senate. And his dad was, I would have disagreed with his dad on many things, but his dad was an iconic guy. He was a real leader. And Bob Casey Jr. is the exact opposite of that. He is never sort of stepped up and doesn't have any significant legislative accomplishments, but he's voted 98% of the time with Joe Biden, so he's a follower. And that's been dangerous because when you look at inflation, it's a result of too much spending. It's the result of a war on
do we lose bad connection? No.
He's aligned himself with the environmentalists. Can you hear me?
Yes, we lost you for a minute, but we got you now.
I'm here. Yeah, and then he's been lockstep with Biden on the border. He's voted against additional dollars for the Border Patrol. So this is a guy who every time there's a fork in the road has moved to the left on abortion. His father was a pro-life governor. And Bob Casey, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, voted with the Senate Democrats for a bill which allowed abortion up until the due date. So this is a guy who is a follower. This is a guy who's moved increasingly to the left. This is a guy who's been at the scene of the crime on all the policies that have really taken America in a terrible direction. And that's the way I run against him. I run against him as an outsider, someone who's been a leader in the military, someone who's grew up seventh generation Pennsylvania, someone who's created jobs in Pennsylvania, and someone who is going to shake things up. And I say to people on the campaign trail, if you want the status quo, don't vote for me. I am not your guy. I am going to drive change. And Bob Casey's a status quo career politician, a rubber stamp for Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. So that's the contrast.
Oh, we lost you again. Dave, bad connection. Guys, can we do a hang up? Is that right? Should we do a reconnect? What a funny thing that we still have to do in 2024 is the bad connection. I was never get a dropped call, but a bad connection. I feel like we should this shouldn't be a thing anymore. We'll try again. Okay, Dave, let's try this. There you go, Dave. How about now?
Yeah, that's good. That's good for me. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry about that. It's one of these things. It still occurs in 2024. Yeah. Talk to me about the state of Pennsylvania, right? As red as can be, and specifically if we can go back to 2020. Jog my memory on 2020 because I remember it was right at the end of the whole thing, and there was like one last debate, and it was about a whole thing came up about how Biden is going to cut, not going to drill anymore. And he like doubled down on it, or he like lied, or he's like, oh, I never said that. And then Trump played all these clips of him saying exactly what Trump said he said. And I was like, oh, like definitely he's going to get crushed in Western Pennsylvania. Yet still Biden, won it. What is up with that? And then you're from Pittsburgh, so talk to me about Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, what's happening? You're right. Pennsylvania is becoming increasingly red. So in 2016, when Trump won, there was 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans. In 2024, for this election, there'll be probably 300,000 more Democrats than Republicans registered. And by 2028, we'll be red. So we're moving in the right direction. And, it's really a tale of rural versus urban and suburban counties. There's 67 counties, 55 of them are red. And that's where Trump does very well. He turns out the vote, and that's where I'll do, he and I will run very well together. And then there's 12 counties which are more purple. And we need to move persuadable voters there, independents, conservative Democrats. And that's the formula for winning. That's how President Trump won in 16, and that's how I'll win, and I suspect he'll win in 2024.
Do you try to make a play in Philadelphia? Are you doing that, or is that
absolutely
not?
Yeah. No, absolutely. You got 5 counties there in the southeast that are critical, and there's a big movement there. There's 11% of those voters that are independents. I've got a lot of appeal to those. They're deeply unsatisfied with President Biden. There's conservative Democrats. The Jewish communities absolutely up in arms with the Democratic Party and what they're seeing on the weak leadership of Joe Biden and Bob Casey. And the minority communities, the African-American community in Philadelphia, look at what's happened under the leadership of Joe Biden and Bob Casey. Inflation is up. Prices are way up, and wages haven't kept up. You have the fentanyl crisis in Pennsylvania, 4,000 deaths last year. So the country is moving in the wrong direction. And those persuadable voters that are on the fence, there's a huge opportunity to move them, and that's how I'm focusing my campaign. I'm in the rural areas, get out the vote, and I'm in those suburban and urban areas to make the case to folks that we need a real change. And I'm telling you, change is in the air. I can feel it everywhere I go.
Okay, last question for you. You were the Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Affairs under George W. Bush. That was back in 2006. That's ancient history.
Yeah.
Dave, that's like so long ago. What is different now in D.C. than when you worked for W?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that, we're at a time of crisis. And what's happened over the last almost 20 years is I think the left has moved increasingly in a direction where the fundamentals that have made America exceptional are under threat. The fundamental of free enterprise, the fundamental of merit is driving decision maker. The notion that America's leadership and America's strength in the world is critical to America's interest. These things are under siege, and that's one of the big differences. I think the second big difference is, I'll just say it. Over 20 years, what we've discovered is the Republican Party has failed, really leaders across both parties, but the Republican Party has failed to address the needs of working families. And so the rise of populism, which I see is not a bad word, I think that's a good word. The rise of populism is a reflection. It's a reflection of the fact that government hasn't served these people well. Economically, they're worse off than they were 20 years ago. The border crisis is putting a unique pressure on them. 20 years of war has mostly come from the sons and daughters of those families. And we need leadership in the Republican Party that's able to bring together traditional Republicans, but also those working families that are understandably disaffected. And that's the campaign I'm running, and I think that's what the Republican Party needs to do to be the party of the future.
Yeah, obviously we need to win the Senate seats in Georgia. Let me give you a break. But we got to get Pennsylvania. Like that should be a red state. How can people help you make that happen?
I'm at DaveMcCormickPA.com, and I'm running across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm everywhere. Today I've got 3 or 4 stops. Jim Jordan's in town to campaign with me. We're going to stop at a bunch of wrestling places. He and I were both college wrestlers. And listen, I'm everywhere, so I welcome people coming to my rallies and doing anything they can, and learning more about me at DaveMcCormickPA.com.